Hey Reddit, when did your something's not right here gut feeling ever save you? Wife called me while I was at work, just to say she was home from her night shift and planning to go to bed. She had worked night shift for years and never called me just to say she was home and going to bed before. She also sounded weirdly detached on the call. I asked her if she was okay. She said yes, just really sleepy. I got a weird feeling and told her I was going to leave work and come home. She told me I didn't need to. I said okay, and then I left work and rushed home anyway. Found a suicide note taped to the garage door. I got to her in time, rushed her to the ER, and got her the help she needed. A week of inpatient psych, followed by changes to medications and doctors. This was about 5 months ago, and she is so much better now. Dang. Give your wife a hug from me. It frickin' sucks to feel that way. So glad you were able to help her. I used to just drive around country roads when I would feel stressed out or sad as a way to just get away and listen to music. One evening I was driving with my best friend in the car and we're on a gravel road that has a huge hill. We were driving towards the sunset but it was winter and the light was fading fast. As the car started down the hill I had this moment where I thought to myself my brights should be on and I flicked them on and at the bottom of this super steep hill stood 6 deer on the road. I slammed on the brakes and the car turned sideways and skidded to a stop like 4 feet from the deer. Those stupid deer didn't even move. They just stared into the passenger side of my car and my best friend pointed at them and said hey, deer. The car was fine. We were fine. And Bambi was all good. I don't drive around like that anymore. They run away when you tell them to get a job. Every deer that doesn't move when I talk to them, no matter what, will every time run away when I say, get a job. They really don't want to work. My mom and her entire family were saved from dying from carbon monoxide poisoning by her dad. He left for work, got a weird feeling and drove back home. Everyone in the house was unconscious, and he had to drag or carry them all outside one by one. They all survived. My sister since she was about 5 was always obsessed with tsunamis and would always ask my dad every night before she went to sleep if there would be a tsunami that night. We lived on a beach. About 5 years later when our family was holidaying in Samoa an earthquake struck at about 6 AM. It was only a dull low rumble but went on for over a minute. Everyone at the resort woke up and went outside for a few minutes then went back to bed. My sister having been obsessed with tsunamis ran down to look at the water and noticed the sea going out and saved a lot of lives including my own. There was about a minute from her noticing till that tsunami hit. Luckily for us there was a cliff right behind the resort if not a lot more people would have been killed. So something like a gut feeling 5 years in the making. I read a story here on Reddit a long time ago about how a girl had run outside the hotel she was staying at and alerted people to an oncoming tsunami. I wonder if it's your sister. Not me but my science teacher. When she was a teenager she was standing near some lights at a pedestrian crossing with her and her friend. Very chill but out of nowhere she had this gut feeling that both of them had to move. They moved just a couple meters away and the next moment a car had hit another car and had hit one of the street electricity utility poles and it had fell and exploded. Minor explosion enough distance away that it didn't hurt the girls. Exactly where they were. One of the wires had also snapped and hit it exactly where they were standing as well. They basically were in a scene of car wreckage and snapped wires and electricity explosions and the pole collapse. Just real insane. If the pole had missed them, the wire would have hit them and if not that then most likely the cars. That gut feeling of moving away saved both of them. I remember this story so clearly from high school science class because it was such a WTF. Pity I only paid attention to these things and not actually science. I went to hospital with shortness of breath and my heart racing. They did a chest x-ray, blood test for blood clots, ECG, and a few other tests but all came back normal. After observing me overnight everything still looked good. Oxygen saturation was perfect. My heart rate was still a bit elevated but nothing too crazy. And it seemed that it was likely leftover symptoms from a bad virus that I'd had a week or so earlier. The doctor asks me how I would feel if they sent me home and I just had a bad feeling about it all. I told him as such and that I had no real basis for it except that I just felt off about it. He said fair enough. Let's try one more test and if that comes back negative then we'll send you up to general medicine and see if they can track something down. That test was a VQ scan that found despite all other tests showing no results for blood clots, I actually had a whole bunch of them in both lungs. I ended up with a diagnosis of unprovoked bilateral pulmonary embolisms and am on blood thinners for life. Super grateful both for the bad feeling and a doctor who was willing to listen to it. EMT here. I was taught if a patient tells you they think something is wrong or they think they are going to die, you need to listen to them. When I was about 10 years old, I was going to the beach with my older sister, her friends and their parents. They had a van that was open in the back. Think white creepy van, no seats. The other friends of my sister's friends took turns sitting on the father's lap when he asked if they wanted to steer the van. He then asked me and my gut said no. This man is creepy as frick. The look in his eyes sent shivers down my spine. Once we got to the beach, I forgot all about creepy guy and focused on fun. Fast forward several months later, my sister's friends asked if my sister wanted to sleep over. She refused and my mom and I were baffled as to why she didn't want to go. We kept encouraging her to. Soon she broke down in tears and told us that one night their father had molested her. The van incident and feelings came flying back to me. I wish I had not forgotten my gut feeling and shared it with my mother and sister before anything happened to my sister. Sometimes I still feel guilty over it. That was over 30 years ago. I don't remember what happened to the guy. I just remember a state vehicle at my house a lot afterwards. No one ever talked about it again and I never asked. I want you to know it's not your fault. I was learning violin when I was about 10 from an instructor at my local music shop. I got the weirdest feeling from him even though he didn't do anything out of the ordinary. I wanted to vomit every time I looked at him, especially his hands. After 4 lessons I told my parents that I had a terrible feeling about him and I never wanted to go back. Luckily, they listened and didn't make me ever go to him again. A few years later he was arrested for molesting multiple of his students. I have no idea how I knew something was off. He never did or said anything but I just felt it. I'm just glad your parents listened. Creds to my dad for this one. Back in 2011, my dad and I was driving down the country for New Year's Eve. Suddenly he goes quiet, kind of starts breathing slow and steady, and tells me to look up the road. He was so calm and focused. I look up and see a car spinning in the middle of the freeway ramping up speed and knocking cars off the road. This is Scandinavia, winter, pretty much on ice. I imagine the driver of that car hoping, just hoping. So my dad proceeds to accelerate towards the guy spinning, which didn't even occur to me was weird. He was just so calm, which made me calm. The car hits us on my dad's side. Half a second earlier my dad turned slightly right, which was just enough for the car to push us out of the road and completely safe into a snow hill. I realized a bit later that a lamppost on that same side we flew off to had crushed the back right side of our car, just missing the angle that would have hit me. Years later I realized the reason my dad sped up the vehicle. Getting hit by that car was a question of when, not if. And if he had not accelerated, that lamppost would have been my death. After that occurrence my pulse always drops in pressure situations. Your dad had the time-stop adrenaline response that allowed him to make decisions with a clear head. It's a literal lifesaver. I'm glad you're still here. I woke up from a deep sleep at like 2 AM during a winter storm. Something wasn't right. I immediately went looking for my senior dog and couldn't find her anywhere in the house. My roommates had a tendency to let her out for a walk and forget about her. Closing the door, I ran to the front of the house and found her laying on the welcome mat. She was hardly breathing and covered in snow. She had been outside alone for at the very least 5 hours. I moved out shortly after. Was sitting on one of those metal cylindrical electricity boxes outside my house when there was a blackout. Electricity was slightly flickering in my house. No other houses had a blackout. I looked down at what I was sitting on and I was like, maybe this is the source of the problem. I stood up and stepped away from it and like 2 seconds later it freaking blew up. Like a pillar of flame shot out and above it for almost a full minute. It was basically a gigantic Bunsen burner and I was a few seconds short of physically getting fried. When I was in college, I lived in a sketchy part of Chicago, Humboldt Park, Logan Square before gentrification. I like to take late night strolls, even when I was living in that neighborhood as a 20-year-old woman. Yeah, I know. pretty dumb of me. One night, I was feeling stressed out, so I embarked on one of my late night strolls. I was walking along a somewhat busy road. Cars were zooming past me. Pretty normal. I wasn't paying much attention because I was too wrapped up in whatever was stressing me out that night. Suddenly, a chill shot up my spine. Hypervigilance washed over me and I became more alert than I had ever been. Something was wrong. Someone was watching me. I quickly spotted a car. It was driving in the opposite direction, a little slower than usual. It was too dark for me to see anyone inside the car, and the car was pretty unassuming. But I still knew something was off. They were watching me. I just knew. The car drove past me and then made a U-turn. Now it was right behind me, creeping along the curb. Luckily, there was a Walgreens a few blocks ahead. I started walking faster, and the car eventually sped past me and disappeared into a corner. I somehow knew I wasn't safe yet, so I still sprinted to Walgreens. I told the security guard what happened, and we both went outside. The car was parked up the street, about 5,100 feet away. The security guard was a big guy who looked intimidating. He marched toward the car, and the car immediately backed up, made a U-turn, and then booked it out of there. The security guard called the cops, and they drove me home. I never took a late night stroll again. My gut made me more alert, but it was really the security guard who saved my life. I'm positive that if he wasn't there that night, something bad would have happened to me. I wish I could find that security guard to thank him. Last year, the 1st of December, I had slept for almost a week trying to fight what I thought was the flu. Woke up and that exact gut feeling kept on telling me something's not right with me. Called the parents to tell them and then cabbed myself to the emergency room. Took blood, the whole 9 yards. Was there for 8 hours. Discharged and sent home. Called the next morning asking me to come back because they found something in my blood. Bacteremia and endocarditis. I was put on penicillin immediately. For 2 months. More tests, more things wrong. Went for a specialized test on the 21st of December. Woke up to them telling me I need surgery as soon as possible. They are trying to find a surgical team. Earliest is the 24th. I go in and while they're operating I have an ascending aortic aneurysm and it caused an aortic dissection. They're able to fix it. I've got a synthetic valve in there now. Here's the kicker. I work in a restaurant kitchen. Just before the start of the holiday season. Normally most cooks would tough it out and just work. Most think, it happens and it'll get better soon. Just keep going. There was just something about the way I was feeling this time that made me go to the hospital. I'm told that if I had done that, I more than likely would have died before my birthday and they would have found out about the aneurysm during the autopsy. That still sends freaking chills down my spine. My best friend works as an emergency room nurse at the same hospital that I was operated on and she was freaking out internally but kept it together on the outside for me. She explained just how serious this all was after I was in recovery. I've promised to tell her whenever I get that same feeling again. TLDR. Gut told me to go to the hospital. If I hadn't I would have been dead 3 weeks later. Cheers. I was walking out of a grocery store when I saw this kid about to cross the road. Something came over me and I yanked him back onto the sidewalk. Not even a second later a truck came flying past. He was probably around 7 or 8ish. There's a very fun road that gets you from Niederndorf to Vach, or back, in Germany. You can go 60 or 70 clicks kph along smooth tight turns and little rolling hills. All around it 4 acres and acres are fields of whatever's in season and no intersections for several kilometers. It's a very fun road to go too fast on. This day, something like wheat was in and it was high. I couldn't see around the corners, but I knew the road well and was staying in my lane. And I was going fast and smiling. About halfway in, I heard a voice in my head as clear as if the speaker was sitting next to me and it said, "You need to slow down." It was startling and I braked immediately. 2 seconds later I come through one of the turns and into the butt end of a combine taking up both lanes and moving slowly. I barely stopped in time. Those extra 2 seconds of brake time saved a Volvo at least, but I'm pretty sure they saved my life too. If it was an old Volvo, it would have survived and you wouldn't have. If it was a newer Volvo, you would have survived and the Volvo wouldn't have. Once I was at the bank doing business with the ATM. I noticed a black and yellow van parked with a man in the driver's seat. The van was off, and he was just sitting there. Made me uncomfortable, so I didn't want to go home. Instead, I got in my car and moved to the other side of the parking lot near a hardware store and outdoor recycling center. It was broad daylight. I just sat in my car pretending to read, and the van started up and moved down to my side of the parking lot. Again, he reversed the van into a parking spot that was facing my car. Now I knew that I shouldn't go home, which was nearby, so instead, I got out and went to visit the two men who were manning the recycling center. I asked if I could sit on their extra chair because the van guy was making me uncomfortable. They said sure, and since business was slow, we got to chatting. I asked them how they liked the work and how business had been. The van guy finally started up his van and left, after I took a picture of it and texted the info to my husband. After another 10 minutes with the guys, I took a circuitous route home to make sure the van wasn't anywhere around. The kicker is this, I asked the guys how long they'd been working at the recycling station, and they said about 4 months. I'm like, oh, what did you do before this? And they both go, oh, we were in prison before. Well, whatevers. They still saved me. Prison dudes aren't always bad people. Sometimes they're just in a bad place. One thing for sure is that sex offenders are at high risk of receiving jail yard justice. I went out with my best friend on New Year's last year and were having drinks with her friends when I realized I was out of cigarettes. I left for a few minutes to walk over and grab a pack and ended up talking to a homeless guy for a while. And when I went over to the entrance of the bar, she was outside and said something mean to me for no reason and walked off. I was confused, so I decided it would be good if I took a walk to let her cool off and then figure out what she was upset about. I was going to walk down the street for a bit, but something told me to turn left, walking behind the bar and then turning to the side of the bar when I see a girl laying down on the sidewalk and people walking by her. As I'm walking over to help, I realize it's my friend and she's not very conscious. She was probably drugged while I was getting smokes, and who knows what would have happened if I hadn't decided to go that way. Scares the crap out of me. Wow. This is such a fear of mine. I live in Vegas and there's a ton of people that drug other people's drinks. So glad it was you that found her. I was with a coworker. He had lied to me about going to a family party of his. But when I showed up, it was just him and I, and we went to a bar. I rolled my eyes and just thought I could clench my teeth through it. He knew the owner of the bar and got me alcoholic drinks. I was only 20. I started pouring out the drinks when the dude was shooting pool because I didn't want to be tipsy drunk while dealing with him. That decision honestly saved me. I told him I wanted to go home, but he talked me into taking him home first. So I followed the directions he gave me and I pulled into a hookah bar parking lot instead. He started getting really aggressive and trying to kiss me. I kept pushing him off. I was still trying to be polite but firm and telling him to stop. That's when I noticed a group of guys around my car, talking to my coworker in my car in another language. He then opened my car door, got out, and proceeded to grab me by the hair to try to pull me out of my car. The other guys gathering around. I had a mind to lock my door when I noticed the other guys. I also had put my car in reverse. So when he grabbed my hair, I let off the brake and my car started rolling back, so he let go of me. It was terrifying. I told our boss the next day and he quit when our boss asked him about it. You never have to be polite in that situation. No one is entitled to your politeness, especially after violating so many boundaries. But glad you made it out and sorry you had to go through something that scary. I was walking to the barber shop, and for some reason, everything just felt off. I ignored the feeling, but every step I took just made me feel like something wasn't right. So I decided to just go grab some food and come back. While I was eating, I saw police cars and ambulances driving to around where I was before. It turns out there was a murder. Now I always listen to my gut feeling. Maybe you smell death. I was offered a dream job at almost double my salary in a different city. It was only 2 hours away, but something told me not to take the job. I had a number of people tell me I would never have another opportunity like this, and my fear of leaving my hometown was holding me back. 2 months after I turned it down, that division of the company was sold, and everyone in that department lost their job. I'd have been stuck in a new city with no friends or family nearby, and no job prospects. You were obviously supposed to save the division. It didn't save me, but I saved someone else. When I was 6, my brother, 8 at the time, and I would go to my grandma's house while our mom worked late some nights. Anyway, one day I was just randomly thinking about fire alarms. I don't know what caused me to think about it, but after I started I couldn't stop. I have had this super focus thing, so whenever I'm thinking about something as simple as fire alarms it consumes my mind. I asked my grandma and she said she hadn't tested hers in a while. Just for kicks she did, and sure enough the batteries were dead. She replaced the batteries and made sure they worked. The very next morning her house caught on fire while she was asleep. If she didn't hear the fire alarm she would have been trapped in her room on the 2nd story without a phone or any way to contact help. She most likely would have died. I always make sure fire detectors alarms work in my house now. Plot twist: the new battery is shorted and caused the fire. Glad she made it out, of course. So, it technically didn't save me. It would have. Anyway, a couple months after my 10th birthday we went on family vacation to visit my dad's side of the family. They lived a state away. My mom was about 6 months pregnant with my only baby brother at the time. We got to our hotel at about 2 o'clock, and by 3 o'clock we decided we wanted to make the most of the day and go to the aquarium. I got fully dressed and ready to go, and suddenly I was hit with this crippling feeling of dread. At that age I'd never experienced anything like it. Pure anxiety. But I knew. I just freaking knew if we waited 5 minutes I would be fine. I tried telling my mom this and she was having none of it. I even tried to just stall her by begging. Nope. Got dragged, not literally lol, out of the hotel and into the car. We pull out of the parking lot and get T-boned so hard we do a 180 into oncoming traffic. As soon as we all realized we were okay I was like, yep, there it is. I've never let either of them forget it either, lol. If this were my fam they would turn it around on me and say, see, the begging you did delayed us, so we were right there at the moment we got T-boned. Glad all was okay for you. Forgot one. About 10 years ago, working security at a site about 50 miles from home. Got off shift at midnight and didn't bother to change out of uniform because I was only going to stop for gas. 2 stations in the town I was working in were open after midnight, but it slipped my mind as I drove past the first one, pulled into the other. Same brand, same gas price, same sort of dump entirely, and just didn't like something about it. Nobody else around but Clark that I could see, but I decided to go back to the other one. Topped off and headed back out of town. I get close to that station again. 3 city cop cars, 2 deputies and a state trooper are outside blocking the road with guns drawn. Turns out a city cop walked in on a robbery. Dude put a bullet in his vest, and the store owner knocked the robber out cold with a bat before the cop could recover enough to get his gun out. That would have been me, in a uniform with a nice shiny badge, but no body armor. Bro, in all earnestness you actually dodged a bullet on that one. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.